Maria was a single mother who did everything she could to support her daughter, Anna. One morning, she was awakened by the sound of her daughter crying in the next room. She quickly got up to comfort her. The surroundings reflected her plight, peeling walls and worn furniture. It had been a year since Anna's father abandoned them, and Maria had struggled every day to keep everything in order ever since. After feeding and dressing Anna, Maria dropped her off at the local daycare and headed off to a job interview. For weeks, she had been desperately searching for any job that would help support her daughter. Finally, she had managed to secure an interview with Alejandro Fernandez, a millionaire businessman who owns one of the most successful companies in the country. Maria was nervous as she waited in the lobby of Alejandro's luxurious offices. She adjusted her dress and checked her hair, trying to stay confident. When she was called in for the interview, she walked into the office with her heart racing. Alejandro, a man with a striking presence, was sitting behind a spotless desk. With his amber eyes and dark hair, he commanded respect. Maria felt intimidated, but she gathered her courage and introduced herself. During the interview, Alejandro asked about Maria's professional experience. She honestly admitted that she didn't have much experience, but she highlighted her willingness to learn and her strong work ethic. Alejandro was impressed by her determination and sincerity. At the end of the conversation, Alejandro leaned back in his chair and studied her carefully. "You don't fit the profile of my typical employees," he said, "but there's something about you that intrigues me, an inner strength that I can't ignore." Maria held her breath, waiting for his decision. Finally, Alejandro smiled and said, "You're hired. You'll start as my personal assistant next week." Maria could hardly believe what she had just heard. After the interview, she walked out of Alejandro's office with a huge smile, as if she were living a dream. Things were finally looking up for her and her daughter, Anna. However, as she walked to the daycare to pick up her daughter, one thought kept running through her mind: there was something more to Alejandro. His eyes, despite his success, showed a deep sadness, and Maria wondered what secrets he might be hiding behind that impeccable facade. The first day of work arrived quickly, and Maria found herself back in Alejandro's luxurious offices. Nervous but also excited, she was ready to begin this new phase of her life. Alejandro welcomed her and explained her responsibilities as his personal assistant, managing her schedule, organizing travel, and making sure everything ran smoothly. It was a challenging job, but Maria was determined to do her best. As the days went by, Maria quickly adapted. She soon learned how Alejandro liked to get things done and made an effort to anticipate her needs. But despite the intense pace, she noticed that he often seemed distant, as if he were always with his mind elsewhere. Something was bothering him, and it was evident in his lost gaze at times. One day, while organizing some papers in Alejandro's office, Maria found an old photograph hidden in a drawer. In the photo, Alejandro was smiling next to a beautiful woman who, to Maria's surprise, looked a lot like herself. Intrigued, she looked at the image more closely, trying to imagine who that woman could be and why Alejandro was hiding her photo. At that moment, Alejandro entered the room and saw Maria holding the photograph. His expression changed immediately. He approached, took the photo from her hands and put it in his pocket, visibly irritated. "You shouldn't go through my personal things," he said brusquely. Maria was speechless, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that she had discovered something important. The expression on Alejandro's face, when he saw the photo, was one of pain and longing. From that moment on, Maria couldn't stop wondering what the real story behind that image was and what it really meant to him. And so the weeks went by, as Maria tried to unravel the mysteries behind Alejandro's sad eyes. Maria felt increasingly curious about the mystery of the woman in the photo. She began to observe Alejandro more closely, looking for any detail that could help her discover the truth. One day, while he was in a meeting, Maria took the opportunity to do some investigating of her own. She searched through the company's files, hoping to find some reference to the mysterious woman, but found nothing. Frustrated, she decided to try another approach. She began to discreetly ask the older employees, hoping that someone would know something about Alejandro's past. That was when one of the older secretaries revealed a story that made Maria's heart freeze. Years ago, Alejandro was about to get married, the secretary said in a low voice. He was engaged to a young artist named Sofia. But just a few days before the wedding, she simply disappeared, without a trace. Alejandro was devastated and has never been the same since. Upon hearing this, Maria was shocked. The woman in the photo could only be Sofia. But what could have happened for her to disappear so suddenly? Intrigued, Maria looked at the photo once more and made a decision: she would find out the truth. After Sofia's disappearance, Alejandro clearly never got over what happened. Perhaps, if she knew what really happened, he could finally find peace. With this new information, Maria began to investigate further, always being very careful not to let Alejandro notice. He didn't seem willing to talk about his past, but Maria's growing concern for him motivated her to continue. In her free time, she searched for everything she could find about Sofia. She discovered that Sofia was a promising young artist, known for creating works full of emotion and for her ability to capture the essence of the people she portrayed. She also learned that Sofia came from a wealthy family, but chose to give up luxury and privilege to pursue her passion for art. It was at one of these exhibitions that she met Alejandro. The more Maria learned about Sofia, the more she felt a strange connection with the artist, even though she had never met her. Somehow, Maria believed she understood Sofia, as if they shared something in common, and this only increased her determination to find out what had really happened. Both Maria and Sofia were strong, independent women who had to fight for their dreams. One day, while researching online, Maria came across an article about Sofia's disappearance. The article mentioned that the police had investigated the case, but had never been able to find any leads on her whereabouts. The article also included testimonies from friends and family who described Sofia as a happy and lively person, someone who would never disappear on her own. This information made Maria believe even more that something very serious had happened. Had someone hurt Sofia? Or was she perhaps running away from something or someone? These questions kept running through Maria's head. At the same time, she began to notice a subtle change in her relationship with Alejandro. As time went by, he seemed to be opening up more, trusting her with more important tasks and even asking her opinion on business decisions. Maria felt valued by this trust, but she also felt increasingly confused. As much as she wanted to help Alejandro, she knew that he was hiding secrets about his past. And that certainly included Sofia's story. Maria's doubt was, would Alejandro ever trust her enough to tell her the truth about what really happened to Sofia? One day, while they were working late at the office, Alejandro mentioned Sofia for the first time. It was only a brief reference, but Maria could see the pain in his eyes when he said her name. It didn't seem easy for him. "Don't ask me about that," Alejandro said, his voice tight. Maria's soft tone said, "I'm sorry." She knew it was a sensitive subject and didn't want to press him. Alejandro sighed, running a hand through his hair, and finally admitted, "Sofia, she was everything to me. When she disappeared, it was like a part of me died with her." Maria, wanting to comfort him, put her hand on his shoulder. "I can't imagine how hard it was for you," she said sympathetically. Alejandro looked at her deeply, perhaps for the first time, and there was something different in his gaze, a vulnerability she had never seen before. "Thank you, Maria," he murmured softly. "For being here, for everything." Maria smiled, feeling an unexpected connection with her boss. "I'll always be here for you," she promised. "If you ever want to talk about Sofia or anything else, I'm willing to listen." Alejandro nodded, and for a brief moment, Maria thought he might open up more. But soon the moment passed, and he returned to his usual reserved self. "We should get back to work," he said, looking away. And so they both immersed themselves once again in the day-to-day affairs of the office. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between her and Alejandro. He had shown her a small glimpse of his true pain, and it made her decide that she would do whatever it took to help him find the answers he so desperately needed. As the weeks passed, they continued to work side by side. Maria increasingly admired Alejandro's dedication and work ethic, and she couldn't help but feel drawn to his intensity and passion. Despite their growing connection, Alejandro kept his distance when it came to his personal life. He rarely talked about his past or Sofia, which made Maria wonder if he would ever trust her completely. That all changed during a business trip to New York. Alejandro asked Maria to accompany him, and she was excited about the opportunity to see the city and learn more about his business world. However, she was also nervous about spending so much time alone with him. During the flight, Alejandro was unusually quiet and thoughtful. Maria tried to start a conversation, but he seemed lost in his own thoughts. It wasn't until they arrived at their hotel in New York that he finally opened up. "I was going to bring Sofia here for our honeymoon," he said suddenly, looking out the window at the city skyline. "We had planned everything down to the last detail," Alejandro said, still looking out at the city. "Sofia, she was one of a kind. I've never met anyone like her. She was brave, passionate, and had a huge heart. When I was with her, I felt like I could conquer the world." Maria listened intently as Alejandro, for the first time, opened up completely, sharing stories about his time with Sofia and the plans they had made for their future together. As he spoke, Maria realized how much he had truly loved Sofia. Alejandro still felt the pain of losing Sofia. He confessed to Maria that every day since her disappearance had been a search. "I hired private investigators and followed every lead, but it seems like she just disappeared," he said, turning to face Maria. Maria noticed the tears in his eyes and her heart broke. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm so sorry, Alejandro. I can't imagine how hard it must be to live with this uncertainty." Alejandro took Maria's hand, and for a moment, they both felt comforted by each other's presence. But then he regained his composure and let go of her hand, returning to his usual self. "Thank you for listening. It's been a while since I've talked about Sofia, and it's nice to have someone to share this with," he said. Maria smiled, feeling a new connection with Alejandro. "I'll always be here for you," she promised. "If there's anything you need to help you find answers, I'm willing to help." Alejandro nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Actually, there is something. The detectives mentioned that they might be close to a breakthrough, but they need access to some of Sofia's old files. These are things I've saved over the years." Maria could tell how difficult it was for Alejandro to reveal his most precious memories. He seemed hesitant, but finally said, "Thank you, Maria. I think it's time to face the past and find out what really happened to Sofia." Hearing this, Maria felt a new sense of purpose and determination take hold of her heart. Back at the office, they began to review Sofia's files, which were filled with boxes of documents, photographs, and sketches that Alejandro had meticulously saved over the years. As she sifted through Sofia's memories, Maria was moved to realize the depth of Alejandro's love for her. Each photograph and handwritten note revealed a connection that transcended time and distance. But as they made their way through the files, Maria noticed discrepancies. There were periods of Sofia's life that seemed to be undocumented, as well as mysterious references to unknown people and places. When she mentioned these inconsistencies to Alejandro, he became visibly uneasy. "Sofia had her secrets," he admitted, "but I thought we would share them with each other." Maria could see what was bothering Alejandro. The idea that Sofia might have hidden something from him seemed to disturb him. Then, impulsively, she reached out and covered his hand, saying softly, "I'm sure she had her reasons. And whatever happened doesn't change how she felt about you." Alejandro looked at her, and for a moment, something changed in his expression. Maria felt like he was about to lean in and kiss her. But suddenly the moment passed and Alejandro looked away, returning to his investigation. Maria couldn't help but feel her feelings for him grow. There was something about his intensity, passion, and vulnerability that drew her like a magnet. But she knew that Alejandro still loved Sofia deeply and didn't want to interfere with that love. While sorting through a stack of old sketches, Maria came across something that intrigued her, a drawing of a woman who looked a lot like her, with the same build and expressive eyes. But it wasn't Maria, it was Sofia. Her hands shook as she showed the sketch to Alejandro, who stared at her with a puzzled expression. He didn't understand. Why would Sofia draw someone so similar to you? Maria shook her head, equally perplexed. But as she looked at the drawing, she couldn't help but feel a shiver run down her spine. It was as if she were looking at her own reflection, a version of herself in another life. As they continued to review the files, they found more and more similar drawings, always of the same woman, always with a startling look in her eyes. It seemed that Sofia was obsessed with this mysterious figure, drawing her over and over again. Alejandro became increasingly disturbed by the drawings, and Maria could tell that he was beginning to question everything he thought he knew about Sofia. He asked, his voice shaking, "What if this is all a lie?" Maria, sensing his pain, wrapped her arms around him and held him tightly as he cried. She knew she didn't have all the answers, but she was determined to help Alejandro through his grief. So they remained together, holding each other in the workshop, surrounded by memories of the past. Maria felt a new determination grow in her heart. Unsure of where this mystery would lead her, she was certain that she would not rest until Alejandro found the peace he so deserved. As Maria and Alejandro delved deeper into Sofia's drawings, she began to have the strange sensation that someone was watching her. It was an unsettling feeling, as if someone was studying her every move, waiting for the right moment to act. Maria tried to push these thoughts away, attributing them to her overactive imagination, especially after all the stress she had faced with work and her growing attraction to Alejandro. However, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. One day, as she was walking home after work, she could not shake the idea that someone was following her. She glanced over her shoulder several times, but the street was full of people, and she could not identify anyone she knew. Just as she was about to enter the building where she lived, a man suddenly appeared in front of her, blocking her path. He was tall and thin, with dark, piercing eyes that seemed to look straight into her soul. Maria stood alert, her heart racing. "Who are you? What do you want?" she demanded, taking a step back. The man smiled, but his expression betrayed no humor. "I hope you don't mind your boss, Alejandro Fernandez. He's asking questions about things that should stay buried." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. How did he know she was investigating with Alejandro? And what did he mean by things that should stay buried? "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Alejandro and I are just trying to find out who your fiancée, Sofia, was. We don't want to cause any trouble." The man let out a harsh, unpleasant laugh. "Oh, you naive girl. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. The truth is, Sofia Rivera wasn't who you think she was, and there are powerful people who will do whatever it takes to make sure her secrets remain hidden." Before Maria could respond, he stepped closer, gripping her arm tightly. "Consider this a warning," he whispered, his breath hot against her ear. "Stop, or face the consequences." The man released her arm and disappeared into the crowd as quickly as he had appeared. Maria stood there, trembling, her mind racing. Who was this man, and what did he know about Sofia that needed to be kept secret? The next morning, Maria went straight to Alejandro's office and told him about the encounter. He listened to her with a frown, his expression growing darker. "This confirms my suspicions," he said. "I always thought there was more to Sofia's disappearance than met the eye. I never imagined you were involved in something so sinister." Maria nodded, her mind still reeling with the implications. What do we do now? If what this man said is true, we're getting involved in something dangerous. Alejandro remained silent for a moment, staring into space. Finally, he turned to Maria, a new determination shining in his eyes. We can't back down now, he said. We're so close to the truth. Whatever happens, we have to see it through. Maria's heart filled with equal measure of wonder and fear. She knew Alejandro was right, they couldn't turn back. But she also knew the path ahead would be dangerous, perhaps even deadly. Yet as she looked into Alejandro's eyes, she felt as if she would follow him to the ends of the earth if he asked her to. In the midst of all this mystery and intrigue, she felt more and more in love, completely and irrevocably. With the threat of an unknown danger looming in the shadows, their love would be tested like never before. Maria was ready for the challenge, determined to face whatever came her way, knowing that their future depended on solving this mystery. Maria and Alejandro threw themselves into their investigation with new energy, spending hours in the office reviewing every clue, every document, every drawing, searching for anything that might shed light on Sofia's disappearance and the secrets she had left behind. Maria couldn't help but notice the change in Alejandro. He seemed more intense, almost obsessed, as if the threat of the mysterious man had awakened something primal within him, a need to protect him that was almost palpable. Maria knew, without a doubt, that somehow, she had become part of this new version of him. The way Alejandro looked at her now was different, a mixture of admiration and desire. He made it clear that his feelings for her went beyond physical attraction, there was a deep connection, forged in adversity, that could not be broken. After weeks of tireless investigation, they finally had a breakthrough. In one of Sofia's old sketchbooks, they found a scribbled address, along with a date and time. It was shortly before her disappearance. Maria and Alejandro knew instinctively that this could be the key to unraveling the entire mystery. They decided to follow this lead, even though they knew the risks they were taking. The address led them to an abandoned area on the outskirts of the city. The place was deserted, but as they made their way through the maze of dusty rooms and dark hallways, they began to notice signs of a recent presence, footprints in the dust, cigarette butts, and even a torn piece of fabric that might have been from a woman's clothing. Soon, they reached a room where they found a shrine dedicated to Sofia. The walls were covered with photographs of her, some taken surreptitiously, others clearly posed. In the center of the space, a makeshift altar displayed a painting of Sofia, surrounded by wilted flowers and burned-out candles. Alejandro stood frozen in place as he stared at the painting, his face awash with anguish and anger. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Alejandro's voice shook with emotion as he indignantly asked how someone could be so obsessed with Sofia that they would build a shrine to her. Before Maria could answer, a noise from the warehouse entrance caught her attention, footsteps and the murmur of voices. Sharing a look of alarm, Maria and Alejandro hurried to hide behind dusty crates. Maria's heart raced as she recognized one of the men. It was the same one she had met on the street. But the other, by now, had Alejandro holding his breath beside him. In the center of Sofia's shrine stood none other than Alejandro's father, a man he had not seen in years. "I knew you would come back here," Alejandro told his father, his voice cold and hard. He could not ignore the past. With clenched fists, he stepped forward and demanded, "What did you do, Dad? What happened to Sofia?" Alejandro's father smiled, but there was nothing kind in his gaze. "Sofia found out things she shouldn't have," he explained. "Things about our family, about our business. We couldn't let those secrets come out, so we took action." Maria's blood ran cold. She looked at Alejandro and saw the devastation and betrayal in every line of his face. The man who should have loved and protected Alejandro was responsible for the disappearance of the woman he loved. In that moment, Maria realized, clearly and terrifyingly, that she could trust no one. They were alone in this world, just the two of them against everything and everyone, and they had to fight to survive. If they wanted justice for Sofia, they would have to do everything they could. The revelation of Alejandro's father's involvement in Sofia's disappearance shook Alejandro deeply. Maria could see the internal struggle reflected on his face: disbelief, betrayal, and the overwhelming pain of knowing that her own father was involved in all of this. Alejandro's father was capable of such cruelty, but Maria didn't have time to process it. Alejandro's father and his bodyguard were right in front of them. Knowing they needed to act quickly, Maria grabbed Alejandro's hand and whispered to him to hide. Together, they ran outside, the screams and footsteps of their pursuers echoing behind them, making Maria's heart race. They ran through the dark streets, trying to lose their pursuers. After what seemed like an eternity, they found themselves in a dead end, exhausted and out of breath. Maria looked around, frantically searching for a way out, but there was none. As hopelessness began to take hold of her, Alejandro grabbed her by the shoulders, forcing her to look him in the eyes. "Maria," he said, his voice firm, "no matter what happens, I want you to know that I love you. Don't let anything happen to you." Maria's eyes filled with tears. Even in the midst of the chaos, she whispered, "I love you too. We're in this together until the end." They embraced, holding on to each other as if they were the only lifeline in the midst of the storm. It was at that moment, in Alejandro's arms, that Maria had an idea. With a trembling hand, she took Sofia's old notebooks out of her pocket, flipping through the pages in search of something that might help them. Then, just as she was about to give up, she saw a sketch in the back of the notebook, half hidden by ink stains. It was a detailed plan of a set of warehouses, with an escape route clearly marked. Maria gasped. It could be. Sofia might have left a map, a way for us to get out of this. With no time to waste, she grabbed Alejandro's hand and pulled him down the street, following the map as best she could, turning left, then right, then left again. The footsteps of their pursuers were getting closer and closer. Just when Maria thought her lungs might burst from the strain, they reached a small door hidden at the base of one of the warehouses. With shaking hands, she opened it and lunged inside, closing and locking the door behind them. Now they were in a dark, dank tunnel, the air heavy with the smell of mold and decay. But it was an escape. As they ran through the darkness, they followed a faint ray of light that guided them to the end of the tunnel. Maria felt a surge of hope well up inside her as they stepped out into the bright sunlight. Disoriented at first, they realized they were in the outer reaches of the city, surrounded by open fields. Beside the road, a car was waiting for them, covered in leaves. Maria and Alejandro exchanged incredulous looks. Was this another one of Sofia's plans? A last-ditch help from beyond? There was no way of knowing, but as they ran toward the car and sped away, Maria was certain of one thing: Sofia had saved them. Even after death, she found a way to protect Alejandro and deliver the truth. Maria and Alejandro were determined to spend the rest of their lives honoring Sofia's sacrifice of love. With the same fierceness and devotion that she clearly felt, they sped down the road toward an uncertain but hopeful future. Maria held tight to Alejandro's hand, knowing that together they could face anything. Their love, forged in the fires of adversity and consecrated by Sofia's ultimate sacrifice, was a powerful force against any obstacle. As they drove for hours, they tried to put as much space between themselves and the city as possible. They had no specific destination in mind, only the urgent need to find a safe place where they could recover and plan their next steps. Finally, as the sun began to set on the horizon, Alejandro pulled the car over to a small roadside motel. They were hundreds of miles from home, in a part of the country where no one knew them. It was the perfect hiding place, at least for now, as they settled into their new temporary home. Maria couldn't help but notice the weariness on Alejandro's face. The day's events had been intense, and the pain of Sofia's loss seemed to weigh him down. Yet amid his anguish, there was a new determination, a purpose that Maria had never seen before. It was as if, in facing the truth about his father, Alejandro had found the strength to seek justice for Sofia, no matter the cost. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Alejandro finally opened the sketchbook Sofia had brought with him. They flipped through the pages in silence, admiring the beauty and skill of the drawings. But when they reached the last page, they both gasped. On the back was a message from Sofia written in her elegant handwriting: "My dear Alejandro, if you are reading this, I fear the worst has happened. Your father is a dangerous man who would do anything to protect his secrets, and now they have finally caught up with me." Maria felt tears well up in her eyes as she continued to read. Sofia's voice seemed to echo in the words, "Even as I face my own end, I think only of you, of the love we shared and the life we dreamed of together. I know with every fiber of my being that we are destined to meet again. That is why I left this notebook for you. Here, hidden in its pages, is the truth about your father, about his business and his secrets. Truth that can set you free. Find someone you can trust, someone who will help you bring that truth to light. And when you do, when you are finally free from your father's influence, live the life we always wanted, even if I can't be there to live it with you. Our love is true and eternal, it knows no bounds. Neither time, nor distance, nor even death can touch what we have. As long as you carry me in your heart, you will never be alone. Always yours, Sofia." By the time they finished reading, they were both in tears. But even in the midst of their pain, a new sense of hope blossomed in their hearts. Sofia was right, as long as they had each other and carried their love and sacrifice, they would never be alone. With the truth finally within their grasp, they knew that nothing could stop them. Maria held Alejandro's hand, looking into his eyes. With determination, she said, "We will make it, Alejandro. I promise for Sofia, for us, that we will find a way." With Sofia's blessing and guidance, Maria knew that somehow, they would make it. The next morning, Maria and Alejandro set their plan in motion. They knew they couldn't do it alone, they needed help to expose Alejandro's father's crimes and seek justice. Their first stop was the office of an old friend of Alejandro's, an investigative journalist named Rafael, who had been keeping tabs on the Fernandez family's suspicious activities for years. When Maria and Alejandro showed them Sofia's notebook and told them their story, Rafael was impressed. "This is huge," he said, scanning the pages excitedly. "With this evidence, we can finally build a solid case against your father. We can make him pay for his crimes." Alejandro nodded, his jaw clenched in determination. "Whatever it takes. I owe it to Sofia and myself to make sure the truth comes out." Over the next few weeks, they worked together, focused and determined. Maria, Alejandro, and Rafael worked tirelessly to build their case. They spoke to multiple sources, gathering documents and gradually building a picture of corruption that spanned decades. But as they worked, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. With every step she took, she felt as if someone was monitoring her movements. She had seen her more than once, familiar faces from Alejandro's father's team, and she knew she was in danger. Each day that passed brought the risk of being discovered. But Maria refused to be intimidated, she would not back down, even in the face of threats and danger. For her, the fight was greater, because her love for Alejandro was reason enough to seek justice and ensure that no one, no matter how rich or powerful, was above the law. After months of hard work and sleepless nights, they were ready to present their case. Alejandro walked into the commission with his head held high, clutching Sofia's diary to his chest like a talisman. As he told his story and presented the evidence they had gathered, he watched the detectives' faces change from skeptical to surprised and horrified. The chief of detectives shook his head in disbelief. "We will have no choice but to investigate. If what you say is true, your father will go to prison for a long time." Maria felt a surge of emotion at hearing these words. After everything they had been through, there was finally hope for justice. But just as they began to walk away, allowing themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had achieved the impossible. The door to the police station burst open with a bang. Alejandro's father walked in, his face full of rage. "How dare you," he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Alejandro. "How dare you betray me and tarnish our family's name with your lies?" Alejandro glared at his father, his voice shaking with emotion. "These are not lies, father. This is the truth you have tried to bury all these years. I can't live with this darkness anymore." For a long moment, father and son stared at each other, and the tension in the room was palpable. Maria could almost feel the charge in the air. Then, slowly, Alejandro's father reached under his coat and pulled out a pistol. In a low, deadly voice, he said, "I'm not the one who needs you." In a desperate move, Alejandro threw himself in front of Maria, trying to protect her. Chaos ensued. She watched the scene in slow motion, Alejandro's father's finger pressing the trigger. The sound of the shot echoed, and Alejandro fell, hit. The following days were torment. While Alejandro fought for his life in the hospital, his father was arrested and charged with his crimes. Hope and despair intertwined in an endless cycle. Maria pulled away just enough to hold Alejandro's hand in hers. She whispered words of love and encouragement, praying with all the strength in her being for his recovery. And miraculously, day after day, Alejandro began to improve. The bullet had fortunately avoided any vital organs, and with time and the care of the doctors, they were confident that he would recover completely. When Alejandro was finally released from the hospital, he held her in his arms and kissed her as if there were no tomorrow. In that moment, he knew that everything he had fought for, everything he had sacrificed, had been worth it. He was free from his father's control, free from the secrets and lies that had tormented him for so long. And with Maria by his side, he had everything he had ever wanted, true love and a chance at a new beginning. In the weeks that followed, as headlines filled Alejandro's father's crimes and the truth finally emerged, the two began to build a life together. In a quiet ceremony in the garden, surrounded by the scent of flowers and the sunshine, they exchanged vows, promising to love and care for each other forever. When Alejandro's father was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, his assets were confiscated and redistributed to the victims. Maria and Alejandro knew that they could finally put the past behind them. Sofia would always be a part of their love, and her sacrifice would live on in their hearts for the rest of their lives. But now, they could look to the future, full of hope and possibility. Hand in hand, Maria and Alejandro walked toward the sun, ready to face whatever the future held. They knew they could weather any storm and overcome any obstacle, for their love had been forged in the fires of adversity and solidified by sacrifice. Sofia's legacy was a powerful force. With that love guiding them, they knew nothing could stand in their way of finding happiness. 5 years passed. Maria stood on the porch of her seaside home. She watched her boys play in the garden. Her son, with dark hair and amber eyes like his father, ran after his older sister, his laughter filling the afternoon air. Maria smiled, stroking her rounded belly, feeling the tiny kicks of the new baby to come. Even after all these years and challenges, every time she thought she had found happiness, life was full of new surprises. And then Alejandro left the house, 2 cups of tea in his hands and a radiant smile on his face. Maria's heart filled with love and gratitude. "What are you thinking about, my love?" he asked, sitting down next to her and wrapping her in a hug. "I'm just thinking about how happy we are," she replied, sighing with contentment. "Of everything we've overcome and how it's all brought us here." Alejandro kissed her eyes, full of love and understanding. "We did it," he murmured. "We found our happy ending, just like Sofia always wanted for us." Hearing Sofia's name, Maria felt a familiar pang of longing. Even after all these years, she still thought of Sofia often and felt her presence guiding and watching over them. "I believe she's happy for us," Maria said softly. This is exactly what she always wanted for you and me." Alejandro held Maria's hand, determined to become the man she had always believed he could be. Together, they enjoyed a moment of comfortable silence, drinking tea and watching their children play in the last rays of sunlight. He knew that life wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges and obstacles ahead. But he also understood that as long as they supported each other, they would carry Sophia's love and legacy in their hearts. With this certainty, he felt that everything would be okay, because they had finally found their happily ever after, and nothing and no one could take that away from them. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible love stories.